I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks Pittsburgh podcast. I've been a radio talk show host half my life, and nearly half of that right here in Pittsburgh. And so on my podcast, we talk about everything that matters to us all, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life. And we have to step outside of Pittsburgh for a moment on this one. And welcome back, Ron Layton, 30 years in law enforcement, federal side all the way to the Secret Service. And now with this news out of the White House that over the weekend there was a substance that was discovered determined to be cocaine. And now the Secret Service is doing all that they can to figure out who left the cocaine and is it possible to do this? I'm hearing conflicting reports that maybe we'll be able to find out who this individual is, maybe not. And we'll talk to Ron and get some of his expertise on all of this. Ron, welcome to Mangino Talks. Always good to have you back on.
Mr. Mangino, thanks for having me back on Mangino Talks.
So what do you think? The idea that somebody would be able to bring cocaine into the White House, into the West Wing, and even get past security with this. I thought a really good question was asked at the White House press briefing the other day. What's being done to ensure not only cocaine doesn't get through, fentanyl doesn't get through, anthrax doesn't get through? What can you tell us about the procedures in securing the West Wing for visitors?
So it's a great question, and I'm looking at news reports just like everybody else. And Robert, I got to tell you, quite frankly, I've got a few more questions than I have answers, just like a lot of people do. Obviously, I've got some additional insight. I think it's likely, particularly we're the podcast format here where we can talk a little bit more and kind of set the stage for this. So there are two types of ways to get into the White House if you're in the general public. So if someone wants a White House tour, most often they have to go through their congressional office to get a ticket. And then what you get is you get an East Wing tour. And you go through an array of security and those kinds of things, but you go on the East Wing. For this particular matter, which is pretty unusual, this is a West Wing tour. And the reason that I'm splitting the two, delineating between the two, West Wing tours are really hard to get. And for investigative purposes, it will be slightly easier to make a determination of who did this fundamentally because the number of people who have West Wing tours are much smaller than the number of people who have public tours or East Wing tours. And so this is unusual again from several levels, but if you have a West Wing tour, you go through an array of security procedures and ultimately you walk yourself along with an escort, meaning from staff or from the Secret Service. This is likely, although I can't be certain, my presumption is that it's a staff West Wing that conducted this tour, but you walk up West Executive Drive. Now, here's something that I do need to say at the outset. Everyone is saying what you asked me, Robert, like, how could you do this, right? What was that question at the press conference? What substances can you bring in and how could this happen? Fundamentally, the Secret Service is a threat/weapons suppression organization, not drug suppression. And so when you go in, there are two kinds of dogs that are at the Secret Service inventory. One is the canine arsenal. And they're what you think they are, but they're looking for bad guys. They are canines that, for kind of a lack of a better term, they are attack dogs. You jump over the fence or there's an intruder, or maybe there's shots fired or something like that. Those dogs are a part of the emergency response team, and they're highly capable. But they're exactly what you think they are. They respond to bad actors, physical people, right? The other piece of this are the dogs that are explosives detection canines. It's an excellent program, but nowhere in what I just said is there dogs who are looking for narcotics. It's not what the Secret Service does. It's not the main mission to screen folks for drugs. It's not what the agency does. Now, as a follow-on to this, as this thing gets wrapped up, you may see some folks that want the Secret Service to maybe do that. I actually doubt that that's going to happen.
Okay.
Those levels of search are a little bit more intrusive. Lots of on-site testing for narcotics, those types of things. But that's generally not what White Houses, number one, want. And that I don't think that's what you want the Secret Service to do. The Secret Service is all about keeping guns out or biologicals. It's the protection of the president. It's not whether somebody is trying to sneak a drug in.
Okay,
now,
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. You make a really good point regarding street drugs. But the point that was brought up during the news conference at the White House was biologicals along the lines of like an anthrax. We were concerned about that being mailed to the White House. All mail gets scanned and everything. Is there a way of being able to detect for that? What prevents something like that from going through? What message is being sent to bad guys? Okay, don't bring the guns in, don't bring explosives in, but you may be able to get this other substance in that the dogs will never pick up.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think for the security professionals who are responsible for securing that particular piece of property, the White House, and I'm trying not to go too far into the protocols that I am sure that are in place. But let's suffice it to say that there is an array of biologicals, hazards, contaminants that would pose a threat to anyone. The Secret Service is well aware of those, and there are mechanisms in place to ensure that that is detected and suppressed. Okay, and that's really because after that, you're getting down into the granularity, and I don't want to provide threat actors with information that they should not have.
100% on board with that. But because that was the specific question at the White House news conference, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that so that everyone knows the Secret Service is well aware of threats like that, and there are provisions that are being taken that will secure the White House and its staff and the president, most importantly, from any threat along those lines. And we don't have to get into any more detail than just your confirmation and at your high-ranking level within the Secret Service. I take your word 100%. So let's go back.
I will also, I'll just take it one step further, just so people know. This is not something that has not been looked at for decades. So the organization has been well aware of these kinds of, for lack of a better term, contaminants, these kinds of things that represent a threat to protect these. So let's cap it off at this. There is an entire division that looks at nothing but those kinds of things.
Okay, very good. Now we're inside, and they've gone through the different processes, the dogs and everything. I'm guessing there's a metal detector that you have to go through as well in order to get the West Wing tour. Is that true?
Yeah, so what happens is you go through a series of screening. The screening involves what the service refers to as magnetometers, as well as canine screening, as well as, before you even get there, database checks. So in other words, let's say you have no weapons whatsoever, but there's an outstanding warrant for you. You're not a threat to anybody there, but you know what? There's a warrant. So there are multiple layers of checks before you get a chance to go into the facility.
Okay. So there's a level of background analysis that's done before you even are able to make access to the West Wing.
Yeah, there are.
All right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a law enforcement outfit. So yeah.
Yes. So ultimately, we're talking about a relatively small number of people. Give me a ballpark, Ron, in your experience at the Secret Service as former Deputy Assistant Director there. Can you give me a ballpark on the number of people that may visit the West Wing in a given day?
So this would have been, during the tours. And so Let me just give you from the Secret Service side. If you were a Secret Service personnel, someone who had authorization to provide tours, and that's not a lot of people. It's people that are specifically attached to the detail, as well as headquarters officials. You only get 5 people on your pass that you can take in. Now, there's a little bit more latitude with certain staff members, but one of the things that you're hearing and reading and you saw in the press conference is that the area of concern was a high traffic area. You've heard that.
Yes.
That's actually true, because when you do a West Wing, there's a walk route that you have to take. It's not just tours. It's everybody who's, it's not like, and this was over the weekend. The White House really and truly is a 24-hour working facility. So you've got people working at 3 a.m, just like 3 p.m. And if you've got an office or you've got business in the West Wing, you are using that same entrance 90% of the time. And so that piece of it is true. You are going through there all the time. So I'm going to estimate on any given Saturday, given service and staff and those kinds of things, you're probably looking at throughout the complement of a day, I would say upwards somewhere in the vicinity of 150, 200, something like that.
Wow. That seems to be a pretty significant number, but you're talking about what, average over the course of an hour, maybe about 10 people on average an hour. To what extent is there video surveillance inside the West Wing? Are you able to divulge much of that, or at least in the area that is in question? I understand it's kind of like a cloakroom, or if you will, where people leave their cell phones so that there's limited access for cell phone use inside the West Wing. What can you tell us about that area where the cocaine was discovered?
Yeah, so this is troubling this will be troubling for really anybody who understands the architecture of the house, particularly going in the West Wing. And I think Senator Cotton actually sent a note over to Director Cheadle making an inquiry about this. And most people who read or saw what he said, not really going to have the insight that I'm going to provide to you on the podcast here. I think that what he was getting at, he talked about access to classified information, and you're probably thinking, what's the senator talking about? Well, what he's talking about is that when you walk past that, you go from a foyer, you see a uniformed division officer, and then you start to walk into the West Wing. To the immediate left is a hallway that goes up to the VP office. If you keep walking straight, you are actually underneath the Oval. If you make a right, the White House Navy mess is there. And here's the piece that's troubling. This is right next to the Situation Room. And so that's where, exactly, that's the piece. I mean, look, this is all troubling, but that's the piece of this that makes it a little bit more difficult to really square and put your mind around. So that's troubling to me, as it is to anyone who has served at the White House. There's another piece of this too that, quite frankly, I'm a little puzzled by. Mm-hmm. When you walk in and you have to surrender your phone or electronics, you usually have to do that prior to going in. Obviously, the rest of the country knows what a SCIF is because of other national matters.
Yes.
But you've got to put those electronics next to a SCIF because you can't take them inside a SCIF. Mm-hmm. There are cubbies, there are compartments that are next to the sit room that I've, stored my stuff there many times as I've had to go in and out of that room. The thing that's troubling that I don't quite understand, number one, it's not really like a thing that you just put there. They look like small individual, almost small compartments that have a key. So if you can look at a wall that have little small, almost like windows, mm-hmm. and the window has a key to it, except you can't see through the window. There's a little door, almost like a mail slot.
Yes.
That's what they look like. So let's think about the person who did this. You've got to take your phone out, and then you've got to put it in the slot. Oh, wait a minute. There's a white baggie there. I must have forgot that bringing it in. I'm going to retrieve my phone when it's time to go, and I'm going to leave the baggie in. It doesn't make any sense to me. Allegedly, this was discovered during a routine search by one of the uniformed officers. These doors are usually closed. There's a piece of this that does not make any sense to me. And so the other piece of this is that oftentimes during a West Wing tour, people are not asked to put their phones in any type of a facility while walking around the West Wing. That may be a new procedure, but there's a couple things here that just don't add up to me. So for this piece of the discussion, I've got a few more questions rather than answers. And again, I don't know how many West Wing tours I did, but not like 2 or 3. Dozens of these things I did over my time there.
Mm-hmm. These mailboxes, if you will, these little compartments, are they assigned to each visitor? So I know I'm assigned 112, so I get mine. I don't get somebody else's phone or other electronic device?
No, they are not. But here's the way that it works. You walk past, and usually you're going over there for a meeting, and there's a bunch of other people with you. They're doing the same thing, and they are marked numerically in ascending order. So let's say you just always wanted to get your lucky number. You would open the box with a key, put your device inside, retrieve the key, and then you would maintain custody of that key until you came back.
Okay.
Much like a post office box.
Okay.
But again, I am really perplexed here because that's for people who are going into a skiff, which opens up another piece of the conversation here.
In what way?
And again, well, because that's no longer a West Wing tour. That's an employee, or that's an employee of the government. Like, you're not going to go in those skiffs. That's troubling as hell, quite frankly. And like I said, I'm purely speculating here. Perhaps there's been a change in protocols where everybody who's getting a West Wing, hey, put your stuff in the cubby holes here. Mm-hmm. That was not my experience when I was there, and there may not be a reason to do that. That's an open question for me.
Okay.
And I don't know the answer to it.
So to the best of your understanding, the way things were while you were there, the individuals who use the cubby spaces are known quantities. This isn't just me being able to gain access and I'll put my stuff here while I'm there. I'm somebody that either works at the White House or am an official visitor at the White House?
Yeah, so let me synthesize it to this. If you are using one of those cubby holes, the only reason, again, in the way that it was, the only reason to do that is because you are trying to gain access to a skiff. That's the only reason. Exactly. So, and again, that's a bit of a leap on my part, admittedly so. And the only reason that I'm going there for 2 purposes. Number one, I'm not familiar with West Wing tours. And again, I don't know, I've seen thousands of people do this that had to, put their electronics away while they were doing a West Wing. Because usually what happens is when you get outside, there's a great picture on the north side of where you exit that everybody that leaves the White House wants that picture there. Everybody does. So that means that you would have to have your camera and your phone with you.
Right.
And here's the other thing. These tours are not like the public tour. They're escorts. So the uniform division officers would say, hey, you can't take a picture here. You can't do this. Staff would say, hey, guys, no pictures along this walk route. That's usually how it was policed.
Yes.
And like I said, everybody wants to take that picture. The other thing, too, that just makes me wonder is the comment by Senator Cotton. Like, of all the things that you could request, he's specifically saying, I need to know where this was and was there close to confidential information. He knows the sit rooms right there, just like anybody who spent a bunch of time there. Anyway.
Let me ask you this. The first thing that anybody thought about, or the first person that anybody thought about, when word came out that there was cocaine found at the West Wing of the White House, was Hunter Biden. Some people are willing to say his name, other people just kind of like, wink, nod kind of thing. Would you say that family members and intimate associates of the president would have use for these slots to be putting in any kind of device of any kind whatsoever?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay, well,
No.
then we completely clear that off the table. My next question for you then is this. Considering that we're talking about a very small space where this little box is for your phone to go in to gain access to this information, potentially classified information, SCIF as you refer to it, do you think that it is more likely to have been left on purpose rather than by accident?
So none of this makes sense to me. First of all, if you're going to use cocaine, I suppose that's your business. I think it's a horrible idea. But you raise the level of horrible about 10 levels by taking it into the White House. That's just stupid. So I would say equally stupid is leaving it there. Why would you do that? But sometimes we're dealing with significant bouts of irrationality. It's why us cops are still employed.
Yes.
So I don't, none of it makes sense to me. So 2 tracks to this. Track 1 is, hey, you put this in prior to going in a SCIF. That's troubling to me on many different levels. Track 2 is there's a new procedure at the White House where all the West Wing tours have to put their devices in some type of cubbyhole or something like that. If that's the case and someone just would leave it there, that makes, equally stupid. That doesn't make any sense to me either. None of this makes any sense. And again, if it was an individually secured mailbox, I can't imagine that you would retrieve your phone and go, you know what? I'm going to put this there because you think that there's some exit protocol and you didn't want to get caught walking around with it. That's certainly a possibility.
Right. Oh, wow. So at this point, the investigation is ongoing. There's question as to what they'll be able to glean from video surveillance in this area. Do you have reason to believe the video surveillance that's available there will be detailed enough to definitively know who left that baggie of cocaine behind?
So likely not definitively on its own, because you're looking at an event where it's discovered by a uniformed officer. So let's say it's discovered at 1900 hours local.
Mm-hmm.
So you are going to mark that, and then you're going to move backwards in terms of developing the investigation and the ecosystem of who was there during that day, and then you're going to go and look at tours, and you're going to make a determination of who was associated with what people, and then you're going to go and you're going to track them on the camera. And so you might be able to have someone with a cell phone in their hand. Maybe you're able to look down and say, well, that's a Samsung, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or that's a this, or that's a this. So potentially, but there are other techniques. I mean, it's possible that they're able to pull some biological data, maybe a print or maybe some DNA. But I do believe that they are throwing all of those analytical techniques at this investigation. And so if it is someone who in one way or another is in one of the databases, like if it's an employee, that will not be hard to make a determination of who it was. You've got to be able to successfully pull that. But I have to tell you, if it's determined that, hey, there's 20 possibilities and we just don't know, I don't think I'm going to be surprised. Equally, I will not be surprised if they were able to make a determination of who this was, because it really is bothering me about putting this somewhere in one of the mailbox skips,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have enough information, and I've walked past there 1,000 times. So I don't that's not sitting well with me at all.
Do you think that we're going to know? I mean, they may know, but do you think the public will then ultimately know? Or because we're talking about a SCIF, because we're talking about classified information, because we're talking about potential national security issues here, that they'll decide that for those reasons, they're not going to divulge this to the public?
I don't think so. I think the president. I think the president is interested in the answer to this. I think these kinds of things when they happen. Presidential administrations want to execute their strategy without distraction.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a tremendous distraction. I think if there's a determination as to who did this, I think the name will ultimately be revealed. And the other thing too is if you're looking at charges,
Mm-hmm.
then that's going to be public record.
Well, and you're going to have to, if they could single this individual out, is it unreasonable to think that they would definitely bring criminal charges against someone?
So it's like everything else. It depends. Is it in the federal interest to actually charge this person? It may be determined. And again, what would happen if you were out on the street and the same thing happened? You would likely be charged with some kind of a crime.
Right.
I would think that if you brought something like this in all places, in the White House, there may be some additional consideration. However, I can promise you, there is nothing in a federal code book or in the DC code book that has an enhancement for having any type of narcotic. And just because you're in the White House, there's an enhancement. It doesn't work that way.
Are you more concerned about national security interests because an individual who had the ability to gain access to classified information in a SCIF is potentially a drug user serious enough for cocaine, and how vulnerable that individual could be, and then the nation as a result of that? Is that more concerning to you as compared to just somebody is a cocaine user that works at
was on
the
a
White
tour?
House?
Yes. Right.
Or was on a tour?
Or was just part of a tour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends on who you are and what you do. I mean, I'd be concerned about anybody who thinks that cocaine is a good idea. But
Right.
I have talked to you many times about my two quantities for why I pay you as a government employee, potentially protecting the nation's secrets. It's two things, Robert. It's judgment and competence. I'm really, really going to question your judgment if you think that it's a good idea to bring cocaine into the White House and then leave it inside of a compartment for somebody to find. I think that doing that is insane. And I'm going to question other areas of your judgment if you did that.
Right. And finally, based upon your experience, your knowledge of those that are spearheading this investigation, what are you expecting, and what do you think the potential timeline will be?
I don't think it'll take that long. I think that they're going to, at least, I think that right now, the Washington field office, and that's the jurisdiction that would conduct this investigation. I think that they are trying to pull prints, trying to pull DNA, while simultaneously looking at video. This is a serious offense, but I don't think it's one of these offenses where you've got all of these multiple sources of information that just take time. I suspect that we will know something a little bit more definitive, whether we're narrowing in on somebody or not, within the next, I would say, 14 days or so. You're going to get an expedite on pulling prints and matching, and an expedite potentially on DNA. In other words, this case is not going to sit in the back of a 7-Eleven robbery where there was a print on a cash register.
And so, my guess is also that if you do come down to an individual and they do have national security clearances to look at classified information, there's going to be an exhaustive investigation of what information they had access to and whether or not any of that information is compromised. Correct?
Well, sure, because the first thing that they do to anybody in these positions, sensitive positions, is they pull your clearance. You get suspended, and then they start the investigation. And so we are still quite a ways from that. And again, the track that we've been talking is we're making the presumption that this is somebody who was maybe trying to enter a SCIF there's a big piece of me too that just thinks, okay, this is perhaps somebody who was on a West Wing tour being led by staff. We're going to find out, though.
That we shall. Ron Layton, always great having you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me back on this episode of Mangino Talks.
Thank you very much, Ron. Once again, Ron Layton, former federal law enforcement. He served in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, also former Deputy Assistant Director in the Secret Service, joining us on Mangino Talks. Thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast. Please be sure to click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit manginotalks.com. If there's a topic that you would like me to talk about or a guest that you would like me to have on, send me an email, mangino@manginotalks. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @manginotalks. And then once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.